Well, good morning to all of you. It is a joy to see many familiar faces, many friends here today. And it is also a privilege to be able to introduce you to Dr. Roberta Piazza. Our first plenary speaker is Associate Professor in English Language and Linguistics at the University of Sussex in the United Kingdom. Her research interests range from critical discourse analysis of media and titles such as The Discourse of Italian Cinema and Beyond, or Telecinematic Discourse. She's also expert in sociolinguistic studies of personal and social identity. Recently, she's been working with vulnerable and mobile groups such as Irish travelers and the homeless. Her work has appeared in a number of international journals, but possibly some of the most interesting pieces of research I've been able to read is the edited book Discourses of Identity in Liminal Places and Spaces, published 2019 in Routledge, and the monograph The Discursive Construction of Identity and Space Among Mobile People, which is to be published by Bloomsbury in 2021. So again, it is an honor and a privilege to be here today introducing you to Roberta Piazza. So Roberta, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So shall I just share now my slides, right? I click on share.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And then okay, can you see all right?
That it is.
Okay.
Perfect.
Excellent. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so as I said, this is my title, The Globalization of Cinematic Discourse, and the tension and resistance between the local and world screen. Probably not a very original title given the topic of the conference, but I'll try to show you what I actually mean by talking about tension and resistance. So I'll start from some definitions of globalization. Sorry, I'm trying to lift this bucket. Anyway, so annoying because the screen is actually covering my slide. Okay, that doesn't matter. So
hey, Roberta, you can drag it to the side.
Yeah, well, I'm dragging it to the top, but it won't work because it keeps coming down. Nope.
You can click on the right top corner where it says setting, and you can choose the arrangement of the desktop, of the screen.
Oh, don't worry about it, honestly. I'll hold it in place. Okay, so I'll start with some definitions of globalization to then focus on particular globalization in the visual arts, and then I'll take you through my analysis of two particular visual products, and which to me are an example of globalization interfering with a localized form of art. So globalization, as everybody knows, is the practice of compressing and intensifying the world as a whole. I mean, in a way, this conference in itself, for me, is an example of globalization. We're all compressed in a virtual space, all of us coming from different countries and sharing this artificial space. So some definitions of globalization comprise global integration, accelerated interdependence, increasing consciousness of the global condition. Not working. Oh God. Definitely not working. I cannot move. Okay. So So in defining globalization, we talk about worldwide diffusion of practices through different across different countries and continents. We talk about a range of available options which get shared, and an acceleration of the process of cultural change. Other definitions include a focus on reciprocal interdependencies, and this is sometimes is considered as a positive aspect of globalization. So some scholars define globalization as referring to the set of processes that increasingly makes the parts of the world interdependently integrated. As I said, this is a kind of a takes a positive take on it. Of course, globalization is welcomed by some and dreaded by others. So, for instance, Giddens emphasizes the positive aspect of interdependence that I was saying before. So the cooperation between different cultures, different countries. But whilst other people like Bourdieu have really engaged a challenge, a protest against, a wage war against globalization, and also blamed people for losing their ability to resist commercialization, cooperativism, objectification of products, etc. Core to the concept of globalization is this push and pull between localisms and cultural globalizations and globalisms. And some people again see this as a very destructive and disruptive tension, while others appreciate this dynamic participation between different forces. So when we come to people like Crane, or especially Appadurai, we see that they refute a polarized model centered on cultural imperialism, because of course something that goes with globalization is the concept of this centering on the West, centering on more developed countries at the expense of less powerful and marketable cultures. And so Appadurai refuses that, and rather he talks about different flows. So these tensions, these strands that keep moving, they're very dynamic. And so he devises a network model of cultural hybridization rather than homogenization. So I think this is very, very important. I'm sure lots of other people will talk about this, but this particular model is very interesting because it is based on a dynamic process of flows of strands that go back and forth and connect different countries and cultures. So Appadurai talks about scapes, different scapes. He talks about ethnoscapes, genderscape, and we are also, of course, interested in mediascapes. And these scapes that he calls, like landscapes, that are based on the idea of landscape, are dynamic. Dynamic because they consist of flows which, as I said before, they are intrinsically dynamic. So for him, this is definition, scapes are the building blocks of imagined worlds, that is, the multiple worlds which are constituted by the historically situated imaginations of people and groups spread around the world. Now, this you will see how this particular concept becomes extremely interesting to the discussion that I will engage with before. So the thing I want to talk about now is globalization in the visual arts, which is of course the topic of my talk. So how is it realized? What happens if people try to be global in the visual arts? There are two main ways. One is to focus on post-colonial artistic realizations, and others. The other strand is to talk about art theorization. And again, in both cases, we are challenging the West centrism of globalization by, for instance, the privileging, as I was hinting at before, less developed countries. So, for instance, we have an example in Seppa's work on contemporary Australian Aboriginal arts. Again, there is a debate on which gets globalized more, whether it's popular art, because in itself is very commercial, so it's more easily influenced by globalization, or fine arts, because their market is so small and decentralized that they really are attracted to globalization. So lots of questions that we cannot really answer immediately. So again, I'm trying to get, sorry, very sorry. So some of the research questions that I think need exploring is what really gets discussed. Which I think it hasn't been discussed enough, is what exactly gets globalized, and what forms and modalities of visual art are circulated more and spread more from one culture to another. And are there modalities that are more easily transferable than others? So these are the questions that really I'll try to tackle or suggest in my talk, in my analysis. So going back to Apadurai, he talks about mediascapes, and then he suggests something that I thought could be the starting point of my talk. So it says that the mediascapes, so these patterns that media patterns that are flowing from one culture to another, tend to be image centered and narrative-based accounts of strips of reality. So we must really remember this definition, because I think it's quite intriguing and quite relevant to what I've been saying before. So then, can we assume that maybe visual narratives are more easily globalized? So can we, this is the question that, as I said, I want to explore with you. So there are no certain answers, but what I want trying to say is I'll try to take you on a journey that traces what happens to a local French film. I mean, a French film that is really quite ingrained in that particular culture, when this is interpreted by a more commercialized, marketable universe such as Hollywood, which represents the global village. And my question is, what modalities within the same narrative change? What are the things that we can attribute to globalization? So the two films that I want to explore with you are Natalie. Natalie is by Anne Fontaine, and was produced in France in 2003, and stars Fanny Ardant, Emmanuel Béat, and Gérard Depardieu, very big names. And there is a remake 6 years later by Artem Egoyan called Chloe, and in 2009, starring again very important actors like Julianne Moore, Liam Neeson, and Amanda Seyfried. So I took the liberty of calling Artem Egoyan a Hollywood film, not because it was produced there, but it's actually produced in Canada, but is distributed by Sony Pictures Classic, together with being distributed, or besides being distributed in Canada and France. So it really belongs to that kind of commercial, globalized, rather than commercial, but globalized market that we all know about. So these are two posters of Natalie and Chloe that advertise the two films. So the plot, or the fabula, as formalists will call it, is exactly the same in the two films. A woman suspects her husband for having an affair, and decides in a very awkward way, paradoxically, to hire a prostitute, a young prostitute, to engage with him and check how he responds to his allure. And through the prostitute's reports to the wife of her encounters with the unfaithful man, the two women become very close, they become friends and develop a relationship. And at one point, we got the climax of the narrative, the relationship reaches a crisis point, and the wife, in both films, remember, arranges a meeting with a prostitute and, unknown to her, with a husband. Of course, there is a denouement of the plot that resolves the relationship between the three people. Now, as I said, the plot remains exactly the same in the two films, but it's the narrative modality that switches from the original local to the remake and global. And the switch is from verbal to visual. Okay, so some my specific questions are: what are the cognitive processes in which viewers plausibly engage when making sense of a film narrative? And do different narrative modes activate different cognitive processes? So I would say that the premise to my investigation is that film works exactly like any other kind of real communications in terms of the cognitive processes that are employed in understanding and comprehending this product. Exactly the same way we understand reality is exactly is what operates when we talk about film. Viewers have the same agency in interpreting film discourse that they have in understanding real exchanges. So they're absolutely the same, exactly the same thing. However, there are of course differences because film is as a special nature. Film has a great intentionality. Film is constructed in a very deliberate and sophisticated way in order to reach and obtain particular effects. Films has benefit from what is called a double articulation. So characters on screen speak to one another, but for the benefit of somebody else, which is the audience. So there is a kind of triadic operation that goes on, which is again not always. I'm not saying it's absent in real life, but it's a particular special to films. Imagine when we talk, for instance, on the bus, we talk to our person sitting next to us, but we know that somebody else will be hearing. So that is not deliberate, but in film, that particular communication on two different levels is instead specially a special feature of films. And finally, in films, when we understand films, we must remember that viewers really have an expectation that the film will lead to an end. So there's a teleological nature of film communication. So what is my methodology in my analysis? My analysis basically based on cognitive pragmatics. So I rely on the notion of implicature, so the implicit meaning that both language, so the verbiage produced in the film, and images suggest. And I'll make this clear as I show you the slides, the films, and also the notion of interpreting schematas or frames. So when we actually watch something or hear a particular language, we imagine a situation. We form in our mind a particular pattern, a particular way of interpreting. For instance, if I see a shop, I imagine that customers will go into the shop and ask for particular items, and then if they're kind, they will say, "Oh, horrible weather today." If not, they would just go straight to the point and say, "How much owe you for that?" Okay, so this is a kind of schemata or schema that will, schema singular and schemata plural, that will operate. So when I watch something, I expect things to move in a particular way. So I'm interested in using this because at one point I show you that the cinema, the film disrupt our expectations. So as I said, we'll start from Natalie, the original local national film, French film, and here is a film grab from Natalie, in which the two women sit together. You can see very well who is the wife, more traditionally dressed, and listening, who listens to the prostitutes. Verbal reports. Remember this, it's a verbal narrative that she gives the wife. So the narratives of Natalie is the name of the prostitute. The string of stories or narratives that Natalie produces for the wife can be organized on two different levels. There are individual stories as part of the overarching film narrative, and they all together support and encourage the relationship that develops between the two women. And the other level is the credibility of those stories. So how believable are they? How credible are they? And this relates to the fact that if they are tellable, if they are enjoyable in the way they are delivered. Okay, these two, especially the concept of tellability, of course, comes from the narrative research by Labov. So this is an example. This one is not in film, but I reproduce a dialogue. So N is Natalie, is the prostitute, and W is the wife. So Natalie says, well, we met again. He was there in the same place with his coffee and newspapers. The husband always stops at a particular coffee shop before going to work. He had to, sorry, he had to go to work, so we agreed to meet for lunch. He bought me a drink, but it was crowded, so he suggested we go elsewhere. We ended up in a hotel. The wife, hotel bar? No, a room. What do you mean, a room? Yes, just like that. He was in the mood. You went to bed with him? Yes. That's not it. That's not what I asked you to do. What was I supposed to do? Not jump on him anyway. He jumped on me like he had in fact in ears. Sorry for the language. You misunderstood me. We agreed. You're a normal girl. Your name's Natalie. Who says she's not an easy lay? Talking about herself. I don't get what you want. Sorry, I was wrong. The wife is upset, pays, and leaves. So this is one example of the narrative which is integrated in this in the other narrative, which is the relation between the two women. Another story, if I can ask the technician to help me, is represented in this video, which is video number 1. So can I ask people to help me out with this?
Yes, of course.
And show the film, the script. And I don't know whether I should stop sharing.
Qu'est-ce que vous voulez? Je suis désolée pour tout à l'heure.
Subtitles.
Vous ne m'avez pas dit. Quoi? L'hôtel, ma chambre, comment ça s'est passé? Je suis désolée, là, j'ai pas le temps. Je vous ai payé. Allez. C'est là qu'on change. Que je me souvienne bien. C'était une belle chambre, en étant un peu rouge. Au début, il y avait un malaise, peut-être le fait de se retrouver là si vite, je sais pas. On a pris un verre au minibar. Je parlais pas. Lui non plus, mais je savais qu'il avait envie de moi. Sa façon de me regarder. Il a regardé mes seins, je me suis cambrée un peu. Je crois qu'il a compris que j'avais envie de lui plaire. J'ai dégrafé mon chemisier. Et puis ensuite, je me suis recoiffée comme ça avec mes mains, comme si je savais pas que mon chemisier allait s'ouvrir.
Okay, I think we can stop it because we have got the gist. You understood that she talks about how she and the husband met, what exactly they did, etc. Am I sharing? Can you see my screen now?
No, could you please try to share it again? Because it goes off automatically with the other share.
Okay, just a second. Sorry about this. Share. Here we go. Here we go. Can you see now? Can you see now?
Yes, yes, you are back with
Excellent.
the PowerPoint presentation.
Okay. So another example is of this verbal narrative that has an impact on the two women's relationship is this one. Natalie says, he was jealous. Part of me was pleased. And the wife says, you felt flattered. Not only. Jealousy is a reflex in men, but then you made up. Yes, he undressed you. So what happens here, as you noticed, especially because I underlined the wife's utterances, is the wife who's telling the story. Okay, so she's actually taken the role of the narrator, so she knows what the prostitute is going to say. So there is a bit of she wants to kill the dullness, the repetition of the young girl's narrative. So she takes a role. She says, I don't know, you're going to tell me the same story that you know, he was jealous, and then you made up, and he undressed you, and you have sex, etc. So the second point, as I said, this is just to illustrate how through these verbal narratives the two women's relationship develop. The other issue is the issue of credibility, which is very, very important, if you can bear with me. So Natalie is the main narrator of her encounters with the wife's husband, whose name is Bernard. She only ever uses the verbal mode. Okay, so what we have to ask is what the camera is doing whilst she narrates, and what does it do when she engages with the wife. Okay, so it's important to actually see what happens to other characters. The voices of other characters are not reported in the same way. So the character behaves in different ways when we are talking about when the camera is on Natalie and when the camera is on other characters. So we have a second clip from the film, and maybe I can be helped again, because now we see in front of our eyes that the wife is telling her own story, or her own little narrative, and see what happens.
Oui, mais j'ai failli pas y aller au rendez-vous. Qu'est-ce qui s'est passé? J'avais un problème de fille. Il a quand même voulu aller à l'hôtel. Il m'a demandé de me déshabiller, j'ai dit que non, ça m'emmerdait. Qu'il pouvait me caresser sous ma robe s'il voulait. Il voulait qu'on jouisse ensemble ou rien. Du coup, il m'a posé des questions sur ma vie. J'ai brodé. Il a parlé de lui aussi. Et de vous. Il m'a dit qu'il avait l'impression que vous étiez ailleurs en ce moment. Ouais. Je me suis demandé... Je sais pas s'il savait, s'il est violent. Comment il pourrait réagir. Allô? Je suis là. Je vous dérange? Vous n'êtes pas libre ce soir? Non, ce soir, non. C'est dommage.
Okay, we can stop here. We can stop here. So, you see, when Natalie asks the wife, "Are you free tonight?" She says, "No, I can't do tonight." And she turns around. We actually see the camera shows us that what she's saying is supported by the visuals. Okay, so this is very, very important because we see an overlap between the visual level and the verbal level. There's another case, again, I would like you to please see it, watch it, which is only verbal, and it's a scene when we see Bernard, the husband, the Pardieu, at the coffee shop, and then we see Natalie walking briskly. Can we please watch that? Number 3.
Okay.
We can stop here. As you can see, let me just get, okay. As you can see, we see, you know, we see the, sorry. We have what is called a contrast. So we have a visual conjunction of two people. We first see the husband, then we see the prostitute, okay? And then, so it's a contrast. I mean, they are, the two people moving are juxtaposed, the husband and the prostitute. But then there is a contrast, because did you feel disrupted in your expectations? Did you feel that given the story that's happening, that's developing so far, you expected the prostitute to meet the husband? I suppose, I hope you did, because that's actually what didn't happen. So what I was referring to before in terms of the schema that we had built, that the two were having an affair, and that she was reporting, that the prostitute was reporting to the wife, is at this point disrupted, because actually the prostitute does not meet the husband but meets the wife. Okay, so this is important because it is just a visual moment, okay, which is misleading. Okay, and now I want to extend my consideration of visual relation with words by making reference to Magritte, something that I'm sure you all know, a picture that's called, in English is translated as a treachery of images. Magritte says, this is not a pipe, and actually it's a problematic statement. This is not really a pipe, it's a picture of a pipe. Okay, so it's the words that are denying the visual. So it's a very philosophical painting here. In fact, Foucault wrote a wonderful essay about this. And there are other examples of how the sorry, oh, I'm very sorry, how the visuals can deny or contradict the pictures. Visual can contradict the verbal, the words, and words can contradict equally words. So in the first one by Dorothea Lange, we saw two very poor migrants with their bags, their suitcases, and then walking by as a poster that says, "Next time, try the train and relax," as if they had money to afford the train. The other one is even more explicit, and that's by a book, White, another a female photographer. We have the line of people after a flood and waiting to get food, and again they are lined up against a background that says world's highest standard of living. There's no way like the American way. Again, it's ironical, isn't it? So people at poverty line up to begging, I mean, waiting for food against this incredible picture. So we know that words and visuals really can be contradictory at times. So a colleague and I wrote an article about this, about the relationship between the two, especially when it comes to news analysis. So to recap, what is the modality of Natalie's story? We said is verbal. What is the degree of tellability? Very high, very interesting. They're very engaging. The wife is very engaged. She goes back to her and wants to know more. Through the stories, they develop a very good relationship. Are they credible? Well, we don't know. We only have that one scene that tells a story visually. Is that credible or not? So we have this moment, we as viewers, a moment of doubt. Okay, and what is the implicature that rises from the verbal modality? What do we actually expect through the stories, but from listening to the stories? Now the other film is instead Chloe. Chloe, as I said, belongs, I mean, I see it, and I hope you agree, belongs to the more globalized world. I mean, mind you, of course, when we're talking about Europe, we cannot say that Europe is not globalized, but you know, there are degrees, of course, of globalization, and France is definitely much less globalized than a lesser example of, or less visible example of globalization than American cinema or North American cinema is. So Chloe is the film produced by Goya in 2009, has exactly the same plot as I pointed out, but there are it's a different narrative modality. So we'll see. I don't have time to go through this, but it's a very interesting interview with Anne Fontaine, the director of the previous film, who is actually quite open to this, quite pleased with this remake of the film, and she said very interesting things about how she expects this to happen. So I don't have the we couldn't upload the clip from Chloe, but I'll try to talk about it. So as I said, in this film, the plot is exactly the same. The wife hires a prostitute, and we see Liam Neeson here with Amanda Seyfried. And what happens though is that the narrative is always visual. Okay, we start with this film grab in which the young prostitute tells the wife, Julianne Moore, that she met in a park where there was a beautiful greenhouse. She met the husband, and they went to. He was hesitant about kissing her because he said he was married, but then they went to a more secretive place, and he touched her, he kissed her, and so they had physical contact. So what's happening in this film is, whilst in Natalie we have a telling, the story is through telling, the narrative is through the modality of telling. In Chloe we have a double modality, which is telling and showing, and this is a very old Henry James distinction. So telling and what happens in cinema or in the theatre is a telling, which is associated with showing. But we could argue that this later modality of telling together with showing is actually more appropriate to the cinematic mode. So we go to this film, to the cinema, to actually see something and hear something, but we definitely want to see something. So arguably, the choice that Atoyan makes is more appropriate to the cinematic mode. So, however, visual narratives are complex systems, okay, that require specific fluency. They're not universal, although, and this is important to bear in mind, the capacity to narrate visually is. So we all are able to produce a visual narrative, I mean, through images, or produce, as you know, in every country there is cinema that can produce a narrative, okay? And this is universal, but the specific modality is very localized, okay? So this is a quote from Kohn, who says that while the capacity to comprehend and produce images is universally accessible to any neurotypical human brain, as language differ in systematic ways across culture, so do visual narratives, okay? And this is important to bear in mind. So my question at this point is, have Chloe's narratives more tellability than Natalie's verbal report? So are they by tellability, as I said before, are they more enjoyable? They're easier to comprehend, they're easier to follow than Natalie's verbal reports. And also the other question, remember I had two questions there, the narratives are tellable or are they credible? In terms of the credibility of the narratives, are Chloe's visual narratives more credible? I mean, would not you, because you've seen the narrative, the example of Natalie, but imagine viewers walking into a cinema and watching Chloe. would they believe more in these narratives? Do you think that it'd be more acceptable, more trustworthy? But, and this is the part that is really important, the film ends with a dramatic switch. The wife arranges a meeting. I told you that at one point the relationship between the wife and the prostitute gets to a crisis point. So the wife decides that something has to be done. So she arranges a meeting with the husband and the prostitute, with the prostitute not unknown. I mean, the prostitute not knowing that the husband will be there. And this meeting reveals that the young woman never actually met the man, and that all her reports were completely made up. So it was not, it was a lie from the beginning to the end. So while in the French film this leads to a soft conclusion, the denouement, in the global film it ends with a catastrophe and the prostitute's tragic death. So this is actually another difference. So in conclusion, we can say that what characterizes Chloe's adaptation is from Natalie is one, the tragic end, two, something I didn't want to cover, the sexual relationship between the two women, and three, most importantly, what I've been talking about throughout my talk is the visual modality of narration. So this choice relies on two abilities by the audience. The first case is the ability to interpret a sequential narrative, and then the ability to rely on the visual over the verbal. So the question we can ask, how is the treachery of the narrative disguised in the two films? Because there is a treachery, definitely. There is a cheat that is revealed at the end. In which film is the final revelation plausible? What cognitive processes are activated in the two films? And in a way, if you think of Natalie vis-a-vis Chloe, which of the two requires a greater cognitive effort on the part of the audience when the final revelation is presented to the audience? Which one involves a much greater effort to put the revelation at the end and the story that the viewers have followed so far? So in order to draw conclusions on the hypothetical switch from the local to the global, we will need to ascertain beyond doubt that the visual modality is a token of globalization. Something, of course, we cannot answer in with certainty. So the question at this point will be, are we really moving towards a more visual culture? It may be possible. It may be possible to say something like that, because we tend to be much more based on images in our culture. I mean, the young people really need images much more than they need words nowadays. But whether that means that we're moving towards visualization is very difficult to say. What is more straightforward image of the relationship between what is straightforward of images, and are images more straightforward than words? And again, I will go back to Appadurai's notion of mediascapes. If you remember, I asked you to please pay attention to that quote. He says that mediascapes, which for him are a way of through which globalization is realized, mediascapes tend to in the arts tend to be image-centered and a narrative-based account or strip of reality. So image-centered, narrative-based account or strip of reality. So if we actually take follow his take on board this particular quote, we can say that Chloe is actually a globalized product, is image-centered and still a narrative. Okay. So we can talk about, or actually it's a question, can we talk about French cinema being a national cinema, being direct, subtle expression of localized cinema, whilst American is more direct, more blunt, more explicit and globalized? How difficult is for the audiences to deny the truth of images in Chloe after they follow the narrative sorry, through the images, through the visual narrative of the prostitute. So when they actually see the revelation at the end of the story, what terrible effort they have to make. So while it's easy to comprehend the visual sequential narrative in Chloe, this implicates a complex relationship with the audience when it comes to the revelation. Okay, so I'll stop here, and I hope I have illustrated what happens from one national, local example of film narrating a particular modality to a more commercial, global film, and how the explicitness of the images could be, that's my suggestion, could be a token of globalization and a token of the explicitness that globalization brings with it. Okay, so I hope that I gave you an example. I mean, I illustrated my claim clearly enough. And sorry about the missing excerpt, but I hope you got an idea of what was happening in the second film.
Thank you very much, Roberta. Thank you for such an interesting presentation. We've got a few minutes for questions or debate, so the floor is all yours.
I'd like to stop sharing. Shall I stop? I don't know how to do it. Okay. Can I stop sharing? Yes.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah.
Is there any question or comment in the room?
Yes. Can I say something? Well, thank you, Roberta, for this very interesting talk. This is more of a comment rather than a proper question, if that's all right. Okay. I was really quite intrigued by some of your ideas, but there was something I really quite didn't understand. Since there's been many spoilers about the films, I don't think the audience will really be bothered by just one more. Okay, could you please clarify which of these two films involved a sexual relationship between both women? Was it the French one?
No, absolutely not. In the French film, it's all very subtly hinted at what could possibly happen, but it's in the American film, of course, it's all very straightforward, very open, very explicit.
All right. I thought I had understood it this way, and I was really quite surprised to find that, because actually prior to listening to you today, if someone had asked me to point out some differences between mainstream American globalized cinema and a film d'auteur, to put it some way, okay, I would probably have said, but I would probably have started by saying that French film d'auteurs are probably far more sexually explicit than mainstream globalized Hollywood films. So
well, I think that, yeah, very interesting. Again, I would go back. I would encourage you to listen to the interview, watch the interview with the director of Anne Fontaine, who actually said that it was in her plan. It was a plan to actually develop the sexual relationship between the two women, but the two actors refused. They said they didn't like that, so she couldn't do it. And I think your question is very, very interesting, because yes, as I said, I see globalization as degrees. I'm sure that's it's nothing new under the sun, but so there is and of course, and also historical. I think there is a continuum of different in terms of degrees, in terms of 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 of, of of periods, or a crescendo in terms of time. So it could be that I agree with you that in the past, French film was seen as being much more explicit, much more controversial and daring, etc. But now it's actually American film that that is so explicit that yes, we need to see the sex. And if you, I mean, it would be really an interesting investigation. But if you see the amount of sex, explicit sex that we see, sometimes when I see something on television, sex on television, I come on, boring. You know, it's you know, the reaction is that it's dull, it's, you know, it's stifled. I mean, it's so, I mean, we take it for granted so much that we don't, you know, it's not controversial anymore at all. So it could be that, and then again, it's globalization that we're talking about, or are we talking about more the national cinema? And do the two interfere? Do the two have any relation with each other? And again, I think it's Atoyan was probably, as a more commercial film, was trying to be more in your face, so to speak, more explicit, more, you know. I think that between the two films, the French, the Chloe film really loses all the subtlety that exists deliberately or not deliberately in the French film. I mean, the fact that that Chloe chooses the visual form is so interesting. I think it's fantastic, because the point I was making is the narrative, the story is all visual. So we say, oh, we have to believe her because she's telling a story that we see. But actually, the story is completely fake, completely fake. So the shock that we as viewers receive at the end is, oh my God, so what do we see? It's really the treachery of images, isn't it? Whilst in the French film, it's all the words, but words, as what Latin say, verba volant. So it could be like, did I say that? Well, not me. You probably misheard me. So we as audiences are kind of lulled into this, I mean, supported by this, the treachery of words. And then we can make better sense of course, you know, we never saw anything. And in fact, the only encounter we saw as viewers was that the prostitute was allegedly walking to the husband, but actually she walked to meet the wife. So we in a way say, that's why we were tricked there. So we make much more sense. So the cognitive processes, that's the point I was trying to make. The cognitive processes in the French film are much more normal, that we don't make such an effort. But in the American film, the plausibility, what we see, is absolutely bonkers. It's not plausible. How do we, excuse me, we saw something and it's not true. How are you explaining that? And it's because the global film wants to go towards a super visual, chooses a super visual modality, which is what Appadurai talks about in his mediascapes. Everything is visual. Everything has to be in your face. But that's the risk of it.
Yeah, I get your point. Thank you. That's very clearly explained. Thank you.
Any more comments or questions? If I may, Roberta, I'm particularly interested in something you mentioned regarding the plausibility of the final revelation. What parameters can we use to establish or to define the level of plausibility in a final revelation in both cases? The cultural baggage, the audience, the cultural capital, or I mean, I'm not really I'm really keen on this.
I think that when I was talking about plausibility, I was talking not so much about cultural parameters, which are, of course, I agree, linked to cultural capital. But I was, even though I said I made reference to Caborn, who says that narratives, I mean, the way that we tell a story with or without images is universal, but then depending on the culture we belong to, we tell stories a different way. So it could be that the French way of telling stories is different to the American way of telling story. And I kind of possibly, yeah, I would tend to say that, even though I don't want to say, because it's such a sweeping statement that is it would be very risky to say anything like that. But I would say that Americans are very explicit, very want to be very, very clear in a way. So all the links have to be there, while the French is much more indirect. Being European, some of the links, some of the parts of a narrative could rely on the assumptions that the viewers or the listeners, readers can rely on. But what I was talking about plausibility, I was actually referring to the internal textual coherence rather than anything which is more directly related to the culture, in the sense that I see that if we see something, how can we then deny that? How is it possible to accept that what we see is actually not true? I mean, going back to the treachery of images by Magritte, I mean, it takes a long time to decode the message that is not a real pipe, it's a reproduction of a pipe, it's a drawing of a pipe, a painting of a pipe. But it takes a long time. That's why Foucault is so interested in that. And similarly, if we see something, how can then deny it? I mean, think of the concept of a witness. What did you see? I saw him. I mean, witch hunt, witch craze. I saw that woman setting fire to the house. She's a witch. I saw her. Okay. So, and it's believed because the witness saw the woman. So she's a witch because of that. The witness saw somebody killing somebody else. And, we take the visual as the truth. So how can that relate to the fact that nothing ever happened? The prostitute never ever met the husband once. What is the effort, the cognitive effort that the viewer has to make? And again, this for me is the drawback of globalization in a way. I now join the club of those who talk badly about it. Yes, an interesting film has traveled from France to America, but at what risk? With what consequences? The fact that a narrative is based on words is so much credible, so much plausible. I said, no, I was joking. I never met your husband, right? And how can you deny that if you actually see it on screen? So very, very good Atoyan didn't think about this. Oh, it doesn't really care about the notion of plausibility or logic or doesn't really want to engage. You want to shock. That's it. You want to shock. And the more you can shock much more by using images than you can shock with words. Because in a way, as I said before, words don't really belong, are not really germane to cinema. It's visuals that are. So he goes all the way to, choosing images. And then he comes up with this problem of coming to terms with the resolution of the film. And what does he do? He kills the woman. He gets rid of the woman who actually was cheating. She was cheating not because she was cheating with the wife's husband, but she was cheating because she was telling lies. And so typically the problematic person is killed, eliminated. Which is another trope in global cinema or many American films. Yeah. So the punishment of the nasty one. the exclusion of the controversial figure.
Thank you very much, Roberta. Any
Thank you for
more
your questions.
questions, suggestions,
Yeah.
comments?
Hi, can you hear me?
Mhm.
Well, good morning, everyone. Hi. I think it's more of a comment than a question. I was really interested about this polarized model you were commenting on, imperialism, the West versus the East. I was really keen on getting to know whether you have further research on this, and if you see, because of as a token of globalization, as you were commenting on, do you see some connections between Eastern narratives and Western ones? Do you think, as we may have somehow copied or shared institutions with them, is this going to pass on to the cinema or to the way in which they reproduce narratives?
I'm afraid not. I definitely don't have any research on that, and I'm really scared because this is such a, it's like walking on eggshells, isn't it? So it's so difficult to say the East is this way, the West is that way, and I think it's more. I will go back to what Ruben was suggesting in terms of cultural capital. It's actually more based on what people have developed within a particular culture, and then even rather than talking about nations and geographical components of the world. But I mean, I'm coming from teaching a module on cross-cultural communication. I must say that it was the first time I ever taught it, and I came out of like, oh my God, so many questions, so many problems more than questions, and so much risk of saying the West is X and the East is Y, and I could not really get to say anything like that ever, because so I think it's, I mean, I like to talk about more about mediascapes, what Apadurai was suggesting, because then we are talking about things that are linked to a particular genre. So particular, if it's a visual genre, if it's, for instance, cinema, if it's television, then maybe we can generalize a bit more. But if we are really talking about the planet is divided between north and south and in west and east, I would not definitely say anything like that. You know, we go into the research by Hofstede and, you know, people like that who says that there are some cultures that are more X and other cultures are Y, and then way of narrating. I don't know. I really would not risk to say anything like that, really. I think it could be very, I don't know, it reminds me of what Said says in the book Orientalism, right? So he says that you know, there is such a thing as the Orient, but we call about, I mean, it's actually the West that created that. So it's an ideological construction on the part of the West. That West has created this fantastic Orient, but the East is completely different. So we are talking about these ideological constructions, and I think we run the risk of making the mistake that Said so much blames in his book. So I don't know. I really don't know. And so the answer is, it's a very, very interesting question. Thank you, Margarita. But no. The answer is no and no.
Thanks.
Thank you for the question.
I'm afraid we haven't got more time for questions or suggestions, but I'm sure that Roberta will be available.
Absolutely,
for the
yes.
comments,
Thanks a lot.
suggestions, and discussions. Okay, thank you very much, Roberta, for such an enlightened and very interesting talk.
Thank you very much.